All right, at this point, State, you may call the first witness.
The state calls Christopher Cisco.
Mr. Cisco, if you come forward, raise your right hand, be ready to be sworn.
You solemnly swear and affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the complete truth, so help you God.
Yes.
Seat, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Cisco. How are you?
Good morning.
I know that you testified in the first part of this trial, but let me still ask you a couple of background questions so the jury gets reacquainted with who you are. So first, tell us what your name is.
Chris Cisco,
And where do you live, Mr. Cisco?
Orlando, Florida.
And what do you do for an occupation?
I'm a certified registered nurse anesthetist.
And tell the jury, what is that? What duties does that encompass?
So what we do as a provider of anesthesia, we just provide anesthesia for patients that are going to be put under for procedures or for surgeries.
Now, as you certainly indicated during the first part of the trial, you knew Cody Amato during his lifetime, but let me ask you to tell us again, how did you know Cody Amato? How long did you know him? Just describe your relationship with Cody Amato.
Sure. I knew Cody Amato for about 4 to 5 years. We went to anesthesia school together, graduated together, and then started our first job as CRNAs together. And I'd say we were both professionally friends, but outside of work, friends as well.
Tell the jury about Cody Amato. Just describe him. Tell the jury what Cody was like.
So as far as Cody's character, I think he had a lot of the qualities that you would want in a friend and a colleague. Reliable, dependable. You could always count on him to do the right thing. Very knowledgeable. And again, very compassionate with his patients. I'd say one of the best CRNAs that I've worked with.
And describe to the jury the impact upon your life and the community at the hospital. Describe to the jury the impact on your life and at the hospital, the effect of Cody's death.
I'd say as far as the hospital, I mean, it was a tremendous impact. I mean, Cody always had a positive attitude. From the beginning of a shift to the end, you could just feel his positive presence whenever you were with him. So he's definitely missed for sure. As far as for me, he's just a great friend. I mean, I just miss, seeing him in the morning and just having him at the hospital was, just a great asset to the team, a great team player. I knew that if I ever had, an emergency or a trauma, he was the guy that I wanted to be in there with me to give me a hand. He's just, we all really miss him. Every time I see people, we always talk about how we miss his positive attitude.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Cisco.
Any cross?
No cross, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Cisco. You may step down and you're excused. Next witness.
The state calls Sloan Young.
Ms. Young, if you could come forward, raise your right hand, be ready to be sworn.
You solemnly swear and affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the complete truth, so help you God.
I do.
Thank you.
Could I have a seat? Just.
Good morning, Ms. Young. How are you? We know that you testified during the first part of the trial. Let me just ask you some questions just so you can be reacquainted with the jury. So first tell us, please, what is your name?
My name is Sloan Young.
And where do you live, Ms. Young?
I live in Osceola County, Florida.
And Please tell the jury, what do you do for an occupation?
I'm a licensed practical nurse at Orlando Regional Medical Center.
And briefly, tell the jury, please, what do your duties encompass as a licensed practical nurse?
I work in surgery and I work with anesthesia. My basic job is to be an extra set of hands for our nurse anesthetists if they need it.
Now, during the first part of this trial, we know that you knew Cody Amato during his lifetime, but let me kind of get a little bit deeper into that and ask you to please tell the jury, how did you know Cody? Describe how long you knew him, describe your relationship with him, please.
Well, we started off as coworkers. I started working at Orlando Regional in May of 2017, and we basically became friends as soon as we met. We bonded very quickly over just similar interests, sense of humor, and we became very good friends. And in the last couple of months of his life, we quietly started to date because we had feelings for one another.
Yeah, I'm sorry, can you speak up a little bit, please?
I'm sorry. The last couple.
Move forward a little
I'm sorry.
bit. There you go. That
Okay.
box right in front of you.
Okay.
That's the microphone.
Sorry.
Move
Thank
forward.
you.
It's all right.
The last couple of months of his life, we quietly started to date because we had feelings for one another.
Now, Ms. Young, tell the jury about Cody. Tell us what kind of person he was. Just describe him to the jury first, please.
Cody was the best kind of person. He cared so much about his job and his patients, and not just them, but his coworkers and his friends and his family. Like, he had so much love in him for everybody. He treated everybody the exact same, with respect. He treated all his patients with the utmost care. He was the gold standard of CRNAs. People still say, when they graduate, the students say when they graduate school they want to be like Cody, because he set that bar so high, not only as a nurse anesthetist, but as a human being. He was an amazing friend to all of us. He was the go-to guy if you had a medical question, or if you just wanted to vent about something that had happened in the OR, or if you just wanted to joke and laugh. He was that guy.
And finally, my last question is, tell the jury how his loss, his death, has affected or impacted you and also the community at the hospital.
It's been devastating for all of us. It's difficult to accept that he was only 31 and he will never be any older. It's difficult for our coworkers to know that his light is no longer in the OR and in the operating room, And we joke that the morale in the operating room died with him, because it's just not the same. He's very missed by all of his friends. He was an incredibly special person, not just to me, but to all of our friends. Excuse me. It's very difficult to even put into words how not only I feel, but all of us, friends, family, coworkers, feel over his loss, because it's just insane that he's not here. We all miss him very much, and it's very unfair that he is no longer with us. And it's very unfair that as we all grow and get older, he'll never get to see our friends start families, get married, have children. He won't get to see our friends go on in school. He'll never get to come to any of my graduations as I continue on in school, and I'll never get to hear him tell me how proud he was of me for continuing on with my education. And even doing things like ordering Jimmy John's, which he loved Jimmy John's sandwiches. I miss just those little things about him. And I just miss entirely who he was as a person, and I'm very grateful and fortunate I got to have him in my life for even a little bit.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. I have no questions.
Questions, defense?
Questions, Your Honor?
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, ma'am. You may step down. State, you can call your next witness.
Your Honor, we would now like to present Jason Amato. I expect that he's going to be reading an impact statement.
All right. Mr. Amato, please.
Raise your right hand, be ready to be sworn.
You solemnly swear and affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the complete truth, so help you God.
Yes.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Amato. How are you?
Good morning, Mr. Stone.
Once again, we know that you testified in the first part of this trial, but just to kind of reacquaint the jury, please tell us your name.
My name's Jason Amato.
And did you know Margaret, Chad, and Cody Amato during their lifetimes?
Yes, they were my mom, dad, and brother.
Now, is there, I see that you have a statement, piece of paper in your hand. Is there an impact statement that you'd like to read to the jury?
Yes.
Well, then, please do.
Okay. Where do I begin? This has not only affected my life and those close to me, but the ripple effect has been widespread. I cannot give an exact number of how many people have felt the loss in my family, but there were hundreds of people at their funeral. The minister that led the service told me in his 50 years, he has never seen a funeral with 3 caskets. It has been very hard to devote reflection to either my father, mother, or brother. As I start to think of one, it's hard to not think of the others. There are so many memories, stories, and special times that I will never forget. However, I will never be able to make new ones. My father was a great man that only wanted the best for his family, especially his boys. Dad's approach to anything in life could be a bit overboard, but he liked to know all the pros and cons of something as small as going to the grocery store or getting a big purchase like a car. I will never forget the life lessons my father taught me, and I will miss his advice. My mother had the best outlook on life. She always found the good in a situation. There were times I didn't know what to think or do, and my mom was always there to guide me. One of the biggest things I miss is being able to talk to my mom. It's been 208 days. Sorry. I really miss her voice. But I am a better person because of my mother, and I am forever grateful for that. All right, so my brother Cody, he barely had a chance to make a name for himself, and let me tell you, he would have made a big one. Cody was a very motivated and caring man that took great pride in his profession while keeping his exemplary character outside of work as well. There are so many people that I have met in some way were touched by my brother. I will miss him dearly. These are just small tidbits of my family members and does not encompass everything they were as my father, mother, and brother. Not only have I lost my family, but there are so many people that have felt it as well. It would take too much to go through all the different people, but it ranges from family, friends, coworkers, neighbors, and even strangers. There are so many people I did not know before January 25th, and it touches my heart that so many have been supportive through this. There are too many names to go down the list of those whose lives have been affected by this tragedy, but here are a couple. My grandmother, the mother of my father, still has trouble accepting she lost her firstborn. My dad, her best friend, my mom, and her grandson, Cody. My Uncle Randy, brother of my mom, has told me so many childhood stories and that he hates he wasn't there to protect his sister. lifelong friends of Cody, Blake, Jericho, Ryan, Marcos, Ken, Mo, just to name a few, tell me how much they respected Cody, and they have lost more than a friend. They lost a brother. The toughest thing in all this is how it continues to affect my girls, especially the kids. Christina misses the stories and comfort my family gave, particularly my mom, who always made her feel like a daughter. There are certain things Christina adored about my mom. She could light up a room with her smile and go with the flow personality. Our daughters, they're troubled daily. Nightmares, depression, confusion, fear, and having to live lives in the public eye. They miss the days at the barn with my mom, who taught them both how to ride. She taught them both how to ride horses. Also, our oldest daughter enjoys talking healthcare with Cody and my dad. This is what gave her a passion for the medical career. There are numerous occasions I can think of, but to get to the real question, or how this has affected me, plain and simple, 2019 has been a tragic year. Too many tragedies for anyone to handle, let alone the children. It's just so hard to go through the grieving process when there are multiple losses and uncertainty in the future. Through all this, though, I am a proud Amato, and I will rise up stronger and smarter than before. It's just going to take some time and hard work. My main focus is my girls and making sure they are healthy, physically and mentally, and that no one can hurt them. I cannot imagine losing any of them. I've already lost my mother, father, and brothers in a blink of an eye. Though they are gone, I want everyone to know Chad, Margaret, and Cody were amazing people that will live on forever. That's it.
I have no questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. You may step down. State, do you have any further witnesses?
No.
All right, so at this time, the state rests. Then the defense.
Mr. Amato, Jason, I am going to need you just for one thing.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, I
All right.
just need him to take the stand just briefly.
All right. Mr. Amato, come back. Have a seat. You're still under oath, sir.
Jason, I know that we've met outside the courtroom, but I just also want you to know that I'm very sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
Back when we were preparing this case for trial, you have essentially been placed in charge of the home in Chuliota, correct?
Yes, I'm in charge of the estate, and the
Okay.
estate
Okay.
oversees the property.
Okay. And one of the requests that we made of you, which you graciously complied with, was you gave us photographs from Grant's childhood. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. May I approach the witness, Your Honor? Mr. Amato is showing you a series of 16 photographs that are currently marked as Defendant's Exhibit B. I just ask you to real quick, at your own pace, just please go through those and to verify that those appear to be photographs or copies of photographs that you provided to us.
Yep. Looks like most of them, yes.
Well, these aren't all
These are,
of them.
right, these are the ones, yes, those are ones that I provided.
Okay. And we returned the originals to you, correct?
Yes, sir.
Judge, at this time, we would defendant's Exhibit B into evidence?
Any objection?
No, Your Honor, no objection.
Was previously marked for ID as Defendant's Exhibit B, Composite Exhibit B will be moved into evidence as Defendant's Exhibit 1 in evidence.
Last question, Mr. Amato. Despite everything that's happened and all the loss that you've suffered and everything, do you love your brother, Graham Amato?
Yes.
Okay. I have no other questions.
Steve?
I have no questions, Your Honor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Amato. You can step down. Defense, you can call your next witness.
Defense will call Dr. Richard Carpenter.
Judge, let me approach for a moment, please.
If you could please come forward, Dr. Carpenter. Come forward, raise your right hand, be ready to be sworn.
You solemnly affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the complete truth, so help you God.
I do.
Thank
If
you.
you could have a seat, sir. Do you have it taken care of?
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning. If you could please make sure and move your chair forward. The box that's in front of you is actually the court, with the black, that's actually the microphone for the courtroom.
No
Okay,
problem.
not the one next to you. All right, you may proceed, Mr. Leichel.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Dr. Carpenter, could you state your full name for the record?
Sure. It's Dr. Richard Carpenter.
And Dr. Carpenter, what is your occupation?
I'm a licensed psychologist.
Okay. Do you have any specific fields that you specialize in the field of psychology?
Well, I consider myself what is called a forensic psychology, which is an area of psychology that essentially is courtroom evaluations, courtroom testimony, that sort of thing.
How long have you been a licensed psychologist in the state of Florida?
I received my license to practice in 1984.
Okay, and you've practiced continually since then?
Yes.
Okay. Would you be able to give the ladies and gentlemen of the jury an idea of how many forensic evaluations that you've done over your career?
Well, what I generally testify is that I do probably 10 a week, 50 weeks, it's about 500 a year. And I have been a forensic psychologist since about 1988. So that's well over 15,000 evaluations.
Okay. And in the field of forensic evaluations in death penalty cases, can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what type of experience you have in that regard?
Sure. Well, a lot of what I do is what they call competency evaluations, which is to look at whether or not a person is competent or capable of proceeding in a judicial process. And I've probably evaluated well over 100 first-degree murder cases for competence. Thank you. I've done sentencing work as it relates to what we're doing today. Not a great deal, probably around under 10, I would guess, of those specific types. And then I've been up to death row in Rayford, doing what is called post-conviction appeal work for people who've actually been convicted of the death penalty and are appealing their convictions. So I've been up to the prison on, I would say, probably about 15 to 20 of those cases as well. So a whole host of first-degree murder-related cases.
Thank you. Now, were you specifically retained in this case to conduct a forensic evaluation of Grant Amato?
Yes.
And when and where did this evaluation of Grant Amato take place, Dr. Carpenter?
I saw him at the Seminole County Jail. Let me get the exact date. I believe it was July 9th, but let me take a look at my records so I give you that. Just bear with me for just a second here. July 9th of this year, 2019.
Okay. And prior to July 9th of this year, after I actually drove over to your office and met you before July 9th, did I not?
That's correct.
Okay. Did I bring some materials with me and get you up to speed as to what was going on in Mr. Amato's case?
Yes.
Okay. And have you had the benefit of reviewing any specific documents of Mr. Amato's past?
Well, basically, I had been provided a letter that he wrote to men in this chat room that he was involved in. The toxicology report that was related to a case of possible grand theft, which we can talk about. There was also a evaluation that was conducted pursuant to that case. The way it appeared was that the lawyer that he had retained for that case had asked for that evaluation to be done.
What type of evaluation was it that was done pursuant to that lawyer's request?
As best I can tell from looking at that evaluation, I would call it a fitness for duty evaluation, because the allegation was that there was some inappropriate behavior done while he was in the employ of a hospital. And what it looks to be the case from reading the report is that he was evaluated by a Dr. Cruz for his fitness to practice as a nurse.
Okay. So all this was related to him getting back to work after his arrest in June of 2018?
That's correct.
All right. Now, were you also, excuse me, were you also provided other items of evidence? You made reference to the 2018 arrest. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. You also make reference to that arrest. What, to the best of your knowledge, what became of that arrest in Orange County, Florida?
Well, according to the document that I reviewed, which was attached to a letter from his attorney, it was what was concluded in Orange County was, and I'm quoting, this is from Catherine Marlowe, Assistant State Attorney, from the investigation which has been made, it is the opinion of the writer that this case is not suitable for prosecution.
Okay. And the title of that document is a no information notice. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right. And were you also provided with a copy of a certified copy of a Florida Department of Law Enforcement criminal history background?
Yes.
Okay. Were you also provided a copy of a copy of the certified birth certificate for Grant Amato?
Yes.
All right. May I approach the witness, Your Honor? Doctor, all of these documents have been stipulated into evidence by the defense in the state of Florida. I asked you if you could first identify what is listed as Defense Exhibit C.
That's the no information notice that I just quoted from by Catherine Marlowe.
Okay. And what's been identified as Defense Exhibit E?
Yes, I've reviewed this. It's the FDLE criminal history, Florida criminal history on Grant Amato.
Defense Exhibit D,
That would be his birth certificate.
noting that his date of birth is?
Date of birth, May 20, 1989.
Okay. And this is a composite exhibit, which is designated Defense Exhibit A for identification purposes. What records are contained in that particular composite exhibit?
This first one is educational records from elementary school. Further, Orange County Public School records,
That would be for high school?
correct? These are his grades and so forth. His records from the University of Central Florida, his transcripts from the University of Central Florida, an essay that he authored for his application, which is requesting that he discuss some life event that he overcame and so
Okay.
forth. That's in there.
Okay.
Further records from UCF. This is all UCF. Yep, there's quite a bit of them there. Yeah, the rest of that is all UCF records. There's, in the next section is license to practice from the Florida Department of Health.
Does it reflect the date that Mr. Amato was first issued a license to practice as a registered nurse?
Original date 2/10 of 2012.
Okay. And to your knowledge, his license is still active as of today?
I would assume so.
Okay. Thank you, doctor. Now, all of this information was utilized by you in conducting your forensic evaluation in this particular case?
That's correct.
Okay. Judge, I would, at this time, move Defense Exhibit A, composite exhibit, into evidence.
Are you going to attempt for the others as well, C,
Yes,
D,
Your Honor.
E, or?
That
Okay.
would also be Defendant's Exhibit C, the no information certified copy from Orange County.
D and E? So,
D as a date, Your Honor.
and what's been pre-marked for ID is Composite Exhibit A will be moved into evidence as Defendant's Exhibit 2, and evidence what's been pre-marked for ID is Exhibit C and will be moved into evidence as Exhibit 3 and evidence, what's been pre-marked for ID. Are you moving the birth certificate in?
Yes, I am, Your Honor. That
As
is
composite Exhibit D will be moved into evidence as Defense Exhibit 4 and evidence, what's been pre-marked for ID as Defense Exhibit E will be moved into evidence as Defendant's Exhibit 5 and evidence.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, approximately how long were you with Mr. Amato at the Seminole County Jail when you were conducting your forensic evaluation, Dr. Carpenter?
It was right at about 3 hours.
All right. And as a result of your evaluation of Mr. Amato and the information that you gained from him that date, as well as the review of the historical documents that you have indicated that you're familiar with, were you able to reach a conclusion with regards to Mr. Amato and his ability or the idea of whether it would be appropriate and what the chances are of him committing any acts of violence or being a management problem if he were to be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole? Did you reach a conclusion in regards to that?
I did.
And what was your conclusion, Dr. Carpenter?
It's my conclusion, based on all of the information that I obtained for this evaluation, that Mr. Amato's likelihood of future violence, should he be given life in prison, is very low, and that he's also very low, of a very low probability for any form of major acting out or management problems while incarcerated.
Okay. Now, did you have the benefit of, in reaching that conclusion, additionally, that during his time period in the Orange County Jail that Mr. Amato's had no disciplinary referrals or has otherwise been a model prisoner while at the jail?
That's my impression. One of the things that tells us about future behavior is current and past behavior in any particular category. So one of the things that's very informative when we look at people's adjustment for being incarcerated is how have they done in the past in a similar environment. And by looking at how he's done, and this is his only time being incarcerated, per se. There was a brief time when he was first arrested, I think, before he was out, before he was formally charged. I believe he was in for a few hours, but he has been in for several months since the beginning of this year. And during that time, I asked him if he had any disciplinary reports, or DRs as they're called, and he said that he had none.
Okay. And that was something that factored into your conclusion as well?
That's correct.
All right. Now, Dr. Carpenter, can you explain to the jury what a clinical forensic evaluation is in the context of a case such as this, when the only two possible sentences are life in prison without the possibility of parole or death?
Well, basically, the evaluation looks at the circumstance that he will be in should he be sentenced to life in prison. In predicting any kind of future violence, like, for example, if I'm asked to talk about someone going on probation, the environment that I would be looking at is what would they be like in the community. In this particular case, the context that I'm looking at is what would he be like should he be sent to prison for the remainder of his life. The second component of that is to look at the historical and personality factors of the person that I'm interviewing and evaluating, because as we know, behavior is really a combination or an interaction between circumstance and the personality or behavior patterns of the person under evaluation.
Okay. Now, did you prepare for the benefit of the jury a clinical forensic evaluation that we would be able to place up on the overhead?
Yes, I made up something that would help the jury understand the presentation, and we would
Would you like me to
should
put that up
discuss
at this
beyond-
time, Doctor? I forgot to give the doctor something, Your Honor. Can I approach him briefly?
You may.
Thank you.
We also have the mouse there if he wants to use that.
He's already been trained on pointer.
All right. Because otherwise we have annotations that you can do.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, is this the clinical forensic evaluation sheet that you prepared for your testimony here today, Dr. Carpenter?
Yes, I had suggested that a way to educate the jury about the factors that I was going to be discussing would be to provide some form of visual aid, and this was put together for their benefit.
Now, you mentioned previously violent behavior is an interaction between circumstance and personality. Can you give us an explanation of what that means?
Well, quite simply, when people talk about behavior regarding any type of behavior, it's really a function of the circumstance and the personality or behavior pattern of the person. It's not merely the person that's in the circumstance, because circumstance can play a vital role or a strong role on how a person behaves. Someone very timid under a certain circumstance, if his family or wife or what have you is being pushed on or what have you, that person might rise to the occasion and become quite heroic. So you have to look at what's the circumstance that sets the stage for the behavior.
Okay. And so what is the circumstance or context in regards to this particular case, that being prison?
Well, again, as I mentioned earlier, what we're trying to understand is how Mr. Amato might behave should he be sentenced to life in prison. How would he react? What is the likelihood of him being either violent or a major behavior problem for the institution?
Okay. And of course, then, it follows up there. It says, what do we know about violence and people serving life in prison?
Correct.
Okay.
And we have a overhead or a bar graph, which we can show at some point in the presentation.
Okay,
But-
well, now you've got a thing up there, example, teenage male drivers versus older female drivers. What's the context for that?
Right, so what I wanted to do today by putting in that example was looking at group data, which we're going to do when we talk about this particular category of inmate. This category would be the group of inmates who have been sentenced to life in prison. So what do we know about that group? And group data provides guidance for all kinds of decisions. I think the thing that I felt would be most informative for the jury was the way in which, on example number 4, when insurance companies set up the rates for car insurance, a teenage male driver, 16 years old, is going to pay way more money than an older female driver. And why is that? Well, because the two groups, when the insurance companies set up their billing schedules, they know that 16-year-old boys are likely to have far more accidents than middle-aged women. As a result, they're going to pay more than the female older drivers do. And that basically is a group analysis of which the person is a member of. In this particular case, what we're going to be talking about is what do we know about people who are in prison for life? What are they like as a group? And from there, we will then talk specifically about the individual under consideration, which is Mr. Amato.
And in that particular, in addition to the other factors that you've talked about here, you're also making reference to his age. Is that correct?
That's correct. That is one of the factors that we will be looking at.
All right. Now, you've provided me with some graphs to provide visual aids to the jury to understanding what you're talking about here today. Is that correct?
Correct.
Would it be helpful if I went ahead and put up the first one you and I talked about?
Yes, that would be good. So what you're looking at here is research done on the rates of violence per year for a group of different categories of inmates. The first one is death row. You see 1.6. The second one is the group that we're interested in, which is those individuals who've been sentenced to life. The third bar, which is 11.6, is what you would call system-wide. That's general population, any kind of category of inmate. And the highest rate of violence is seen in the high security category. These are generally inmates who've already had frequent episodes of violent acting out or major forms of rule violation. The important point that I want to have you take away from this graph is how low the rate of violent behavior is in the group of men, typically men, it's almost 99% men, who were incarcerated under a life sentence. So much like I asked you to think about young teenage drivers and older female drivers, and to get a sense of how you would look at those groups, this bar that says life sentence tells you that as a group, this type of inmate is perhaps surprisingly low on a base rate of violence.
And just so the jury has a sense, these numbers that are reflected on this graph, this is per 100 inmates?
Correct.
Okay. And this is coming from data that you maintain in your practice as a forensic psychologist.
Well, this is research that has been published in a peer-reviewed journal. This
Okay.
is peer-reviewed journal data.
All right. Now, I've got a couple other graphs as well. Is there another one that you would like me to put up now?
Well, I would say if you would put back up Mr. Amato's, the one we were looking at earlier,
Yes, sir.
the clinical forensic evaluation, if you don't mind.
Give me a second to get it all back down to right size.
There you go. So we've already discussed number 5, and if you want to refresh your memory, it's up there for you to take another look at it. I know we're going to go over a lot of things here this morning. So as I just pointed out in number 5, their rates are quite low when compared with high security and general population. One of the things that's worth also pointing out is that on number 6, I wanted to bring to your attention that half of the individuals in that study were individuals who have been convicted of murder. So if you're thinking, well, wait a minute, what about murder? What about those who've been convicted of murder? Nearly half of the group that was serving life in prison were convicted murderers. And so how do we proceed next? Well, what you need to understand is we already talked about the general group. It's kind of low to begin with. So what about the actual person that we're concerned about today, which is Mr. Amato? Well, what about him? That's when we take a look at the personality of the individual, their historical background, and to see if they have any of the empirically derived personality and historical risk factors which would predict higher rates of violence. So then we can now go into talking more about Mr. Amato. Under 8, what are the factors that would predict somebody's potential for being violent? Well, these individuals who are prone to violence have a history of prior violence. They have exhibited violence at an early age. They, as adults, have relationship instability, employment problems, substance use problems, a major mental illness, psychopathy, that's a fancy word for psychopath, early maladjustment, personality disorders such as antisocial personality, borderline personality, narcissistic personality, and a tendency to be impulsive or a propensity for impulsivity.
Did you find any of those factors after doing your evaluation of Grant Amato?
No. In fact, he has a very clean prior history as it relates to the type of people who are prone to be violent. Now, I should point out, I'm not here to dispute the finding of the jury today. I want to make sure that that's very clear. The jury has spoken. Mr. Amato has been found guilty of these crimes, and obviously they're violent crimes. What we're talking about is other factors that predate that can go into our analysis, because our interest is what will he be like outside of the context in which those murders occurred. How about in the future, what will he be like? And as you see, and for sake of brevity, they're up there for you to review. He has none of those.
Okay. So, are there other items of data or demonstrative aids that will help the jury to understand the conclusions that you've drawn in this case?
Sure. Number 9, we have 2 graphs to share about the relationship of age and violence, and how most of the violent behavior occur in individuals who are much younger than Mr. Amato. Here we go. And maybe even possibly blow that up just a tad, since
yes,
it's,
sir.
there we go.
And you have, oh gosh, you have a pointer that you'll be able to utilize to help.
Correct.
Okay.
So the vertical axis is standardized arrest rates per 100 individuals or arrestees. And along the bottom, let's see.
Is it working?
There we go. Along the bottom, we have age, okay? Now, the importance of this graph is that what we're considering about this sentence is, what is he going to be like as he ages? Because Mr. Amato, should the jury decide on this sentence of life without the possibility of parole, will be considering what he will be like as he goes through his aging process while incarcerated. What you can see here in this spike right here, which is roughly about age 18, the vast majority of arrests occur with individuals who are right in their late teens, early 20s. And then you see you have a fairly precipitous declining function across time, so that as individuals age, and I'm highlighting the number 30 because that's where Mr. Amato is right now. He's 30 years old. He's already well past the peak and on the downhill slope. What that does is it provides a certain amount of reassurance that, all things considered, as people age, they, in a sense, have the wind at their back. They're less likely to engage just as a function of age. And clearly, as they get past about 40, it really starts to drop down towards zero. So the older inmates who are serving life, they're not acting out in prison. They're not. The acting out group, the ones who are giving all the trouble to the authorities, are right here.
Okay. I've got another graph, Doctor. Would you like me to put that up?
Yes, and I think that will further illuminate what we're trying to describe here. So this graph, and again derived from empirical research, is, as you can see across the top, this is the average number of prison rule violations per inmate per year by age. On the vertical axis, we have yearly violations. We have age cohort groups, 17 or less, 18 to 24, 25 to 34, etc. Again, same function is seen here. We see here the 18-year-olds, and I would bet you $1 that most of this is the early 20s, 18 to 22-ish. They're the highest. 25 to 34, which is Mr. Amato. 35 to 44, they have 0.6, and over 45, which we saw on the other graph, it pretty much is down towards zero. So again, in both of these graphs, you see that as people age, there's less and less likelihood of difficulty. So if he were to be given life in prison, age would be a factor, but I think that the other things which we showed earlier about his lack of any of the factors probably speaks most loudly to me about what it is. That would be factor 8. I think as we look at him, although age is on his side, the primary finding is prior to the commission of these crimes, he brings nothing that would indicate the possibility that he's likely to be violent.
All right. So we go to the 10th one, the 10th aspect of this. So when the contextual factors of low rates of violence for life sentence inmates and Mr. Amato's lack of the personality and historical factors correlated with violence are taken together, your conclusion is?
That he's a low risk for violence while serving a life sentence. And additionally, we have a list of other factors which are not listed in our factor 8, which particularly looks at prior violence, because I think one of the things about Mr. Amato, if you look at his educational background, his employment, I think he's not only someone who's apt to be free of disruptive or violent behavior, but quite frankly, I think he has a reasonably good likelihood of being a model inmate. Okay. And I think there are some other additional factors.
But before we leave this, though, so what you're indicating is that Mr. Amato's age, which is currently 30 years of age, is a factor that the jurors should give due consideration in their deliberations.
Absolutely.
All right. Now, I've shown you the documents that have been entered into evidence, the birth certificate, the lack of a prior criminal history, with the exception of arrest where no information was filed, school records, the professional license, which is currently a critical care registered nurse license that's currently active. All of those things in conjunction with your evaluation of Mr. Amato, did you develop some additional factors that you believe the jury should consider?
Yes, because the number 8 on that list is research about violence, and there's a broader analysis that I think deserves some attention. These are probably secondary factors, but go to the issue of the type of adjustment that I would expect to see should he be given life in prison.
And in the context of additional factors to consider, have you prepared a list for the jurors to look at while you explain those particular factors?
Yes.
Would you like me to show it now?
Yes, I think that would be helpful. Now, there's some of these are overlap from the earlier discussion. One of the things about individuals who act out in prison is not only do they have violent historical, like prior arrests, convictions, and so forth, but they have criminal convictions for a whole host of other behaviors, dealing and using drugs, all sorts of things. He has no prior criminal convictions, so he doesn't have a criminal history. We already talked about the other two, so I'll skip over those. Also, the period of incarceration where there were no DRs or disciplinary reports. The other thing about prison is it's highly structured, and the individuals who have a hard time coping and therefore are at higher risk for acting out have demonstrated almost universally a history of poor ability to adjust to structure. So when I do an interview with somebody and I ask them about their work history, I always ask them, have you ever been fired? Have you ever quit? Have you ever come late to work? Have you walked off? Have you stormed off, yelled at the boss, got in fights with the coworkers? Those things are tells, those are indicators. And so what you see here is his school records, which I reviewed. He has no suspensions. You know, a lot of these, when they're kids, they get put in out of school suspension. They'll tell me they were expelled, put in alternative school. Work, of course, we know he had that one incident, but other than that incident, which maybe the jury's aware of, where he was accused of mishandling some medications, his work history is very good. We already talked about his adjustment in jail. He has no history of substance abuse or alcohol abuse. This is very important. Unfortunately, although it shouldn't occur, there are substances that people can get their hands on in prison. Shouldn't be, but it is the case that they can brew up Bach, as they call it, which is homemade alcohol. They can smuggle in somehow or other drugs, but that's not going to be a problem because he doesn't use or abuse drugs. He has no drug use history, and although he does drink socially, he's not really a drinker. I didn't diagnose him with a mental illness. He has some features of a dependent personality disorder, which we can talk about at some length, but no significant mental illness, no bipolar disorder, ADHD, schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder. We know that brain injury or neurological impairment can be risk factors. He has no history of any ever being in a coma, neurosurgeries, none of these sorts of things which can reduce inhibition to act out. I don't think he has any features of an antisocial personality disorder. He's certainly not psychopathic. We talked about behavioral disruption in school. I think one of the interesting things about Mr. Amato is that he got a bachelor's degree in nursing. And I don't know how many people that you may know who are nurses, but they are caretakers. Every nurse I've ever known has always been a caretaker type of person. They care about people. That's what you have to do 8 to 10 hours a day, is provide care. This suggests that he certainly could find something constructive, some pro-social type of activity, working in the library, tutoring, helping people get a GED, whatever. He could make use of his remaining years incarcerated should he be given life in prison. He has a good capacity for social relations in the community. He had friends. He and his brother Cody had a circle of friends they hung out with. That's important because you really have to be able to kind of get along and maneuver around in prison to stay out of significant difficulties. And so the fact that he has that capacity, I think, is helpful. And of course, we've already talked about the other factor. And as I conclude, all of these factors would further argue against imposing the death penalty.
All right. Now, the codependency disorder that you refer to, is that a personality trait that would lend itself to violent behavior or being a management problem?
Well, first of all, he doesn't have a diagnosable dependent personality disorder of anything that because obviously I'm looking to see on the converse, is this somebody that I can say something positive about? And if it's not there, it's not there. And so in that investigation, the only thing that I could see that would suggest any kind of personality disorder was dependent personality disorder, but he doesn't have it. He has features of it. That is the fact that he was living at home. He had not really gotten out on his own. I think he was overly enmeshed, in a sense, dependent on his family. And the dependent personality is an easygoing, caring, non-combative, non-aggressive type. And again, I think that's overrepresented in teachers, nurses, and I say that in a positive way. But these are people that are almost never presenting with aggressive behavior.
Okay. So,
We're going to take a short 5-minute break for jurors.
yes, ma'am.
All right, so sorry to interrupt, but at this point, let's just take a 5-minute recess.
Essentially done.
Doctor, you can step down if you need a stretch break, but you can't talk to anybody, including the attorneys, because you're still on the stand. All right? Mr.
I
Lytle,
think I'll take advantage of that break myself.
how much longer do you think you
I only
have?
had one more question, Judge.
I
I'm sorry.
apologize, I just had a flag that one of the jurors needed a break.
State his conclusion, and that was done.
Okay, well, we'll do that then when we get back. Mr.
Yes,
Stone,
ma'am.
how long do you anticipate that your cross will be?
I don't know, maybe 15 minutes, 20
Okay.
minutes at the most.
So then we'll go through and then we'll release them afterwards for lunch and then we'll do
Sounds
jury
great, Judge.
instructions.
Thank
Okay.